Hi, it's Alexa from Homestead, and today I'm going to share how to make a pumpkin pie with a real pumpkin and the crust. So I have a nice pumpkin here that I cut in half, and I gutted it and I took out all the seeds and I made pumpkin seeds with it, and then I skinned the skin off the back. So I did that a few days ago, and then I've just kept this in my fridge. So I just wanted to add this so you could see this process. I used a sugar pie pumpkin, and in this recipe I only used half of the pumpkin, but I gutted it, took the pumpkin seeds out. This is what it looked like. And I used the seeds to make roasted pumpkin seeds, so I will share that recipe as well. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to roast this pumpkin in the oven to make it nice and soft. That's what's going to create our pureed pumpkin, which will go in the pumpkin pie like you normally would get if you're going to buy one from a can. So you can totally make this recipe with canned pumpkin, but we have so many pumpkins this year that it's just a crime for me not to use a real one. I will also be sharing my recipe for pumpkin seeds. So if you do this method where you actually get the pumpkin, make sure you make the pumpkin seeds with it. It's so good, and I'll be sharing that, so be on the lookout for that. We're gonna make this with the whole pumpkin pie. I suggest doing the cutting and the gutting of the pumpkin maybe the day before, the roasting of the pumpkin first. While that's going, we're gonna prepare our crust. So to prevent the pumpkin from burning, I'm going to rub it with some melted coconut oil first. And this coconut oil is good up to 365 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna set my oven to 365, and that's what I'm gonna roast the pumpkin at. So I'm just gonna chop this up into cubes. The smaller you chop them, the faster they will roast. Okay, so I'm just adding the last of the chopped pumpkin to this roasting pan, and I went ahead and sprayed some coconut oil on the bottom of the pan, but then I lined it with parchment paper. I love using parchment paper because it's safe and does not stick. So this is about half the pumpkin right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in the oven. So I'm also gonna add about a third of a cup of melted coconut oil to the pumpkin. So I'm just putting it in here and then microwave it on low. This will also add a nice coconut flavor to your pumpkin pie. And next we're gonna make the crust. Now for the crust, you can always buy a store-bought crust or a ready-to-make crust. So whatever you're doing for that, feel free. I'm going to show you a really nice way to make crust because I learned this from a friend, and it works incredibly well. So what you're gonna need if you are interested in making the crust, which I'm gonna do now, is flour, sugar, and salt. So you want 1 cup plus 1/8 of a cup of flour, a tablespoon of sugar, and a teaspoon of salt, and we're gonna put that in a bowl. So you're gonna need 10 tablespoons of butter. So one stick is 8 tablespoons, and then you're gonna want 2 from another stick. And you wanna keep the butter as cold as possible. So try not to touch it, take it right out of the fridge, and just be careful, you don't want it to warm up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the flour mixture that you just made with the sugar and the salt, and you're gonna put it in a food processor after you cut the butter into cubes. So you're gonna throw that all into a food processor and pulse it. You don't wanna overmix it, and you want the butter to stay cold. So you just wanna pulse it until it's small, like small bits of butter. So we're cutting it into cubes. And now we're ready to throw this in the food processor with the flour mixture. Okay, so I just mixed my flour, my butter mixture, so I'm gonna pour this into a bowl, large mixing bowl. And my butter is about the size of a pea, so I didn't overmix it. And I'm going to sprinkle it with ice water. So get some ice cold water with some ice cubes in it in a smaller bowl, and then get a tablespoon measure. So I have my flour with my butter mixture in here, and the butter is just about the size of a pea, so it's not too overly mixed. And then I'm going to have a bowl of ice filtered water here, and I'm going to take about a tablespoon of that, sprinkle it over the water, or over the flour, and then gently fold it in. And this is key because this is keeping your flour and your butter nice and cold. And I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to repeat this for a total of about 3 to 6 tablespoons total, and just keep kneading it in. And as you can see, we are getting a nice pie crust dough going here. If your dough is wet and kind of slimy, which mine actually was here, just go ahead and reach in and grab some more flour and keep kneading it. You don't want to over knead it, but just get it to the point where it's got all of the flour out of the bowl, and if you were to stick your finger in it, it would slowly bounce back. So now I'm going to add my can of organic coconut milk and 2 large farm fresh eggs. Then you're going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, and ½ a teaspoon of salt. Okay, so after about 45 minutes, the pumpkin in the oven is softened enough to put it into our food processor to blend it. Do that, but while this cools down for a second, we're going to start getting the other seasoning ingredients ready for the pie that we'll ultimately put this into. So for this recipe, I'm going to use a 14-ounce can of coconut milk. You can also use sweetened condensed milk, but I love the taste of coconut with pumpkin, so this is perfect. So while we're waiting for the pumpkin to cool off before we can puree it, I'm going to go ahead and get my workstation ready to roll out the dough, because the dough is probably cold enough by now in the fridge. So I'm going to clear everything out, clean up the countertop, and put some flour down. So I just cleaned my surface off and dried it, make sure it's not wet. So I'm going to roll this crust out, put it in my pie pan, and then we'll prepare the pumpkin, and it'll just go in, it'll be so easy. So now it is time to puree our pumpkin. So I'm just using a small food processor here, and I put the pumpkin cubes that have cooled off a little bit in here. And you might have to adjust because it is thick. So this makes about 2 cups of pureed pumpkin. So now you're going to add the pureed pumpkin to the wet mixture that you had prepared earlier. And I'm going to go ahead and beat it with these whisk attachments that I have. If you don't have that, you can use a whisk if you want. You want it to be kind of nice and frothy though, so after I beat it with this electric mixture, I'm going to go ahead and use a handheld whisk. And now the moment you've been waiting for, you're going to add that mixture to the pie crust And if you have some small chunks of pumpkin left that didn't get blended, that's totally fine. We actually really enjoy eating them as part of the pie. Well, thank you for making this pumpkin pie recipe with me today with a farm fresh pumpkin and a homemade crust. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that we definitely will. If you're new to my page, please subscribe on YouTube and like on Facebook. I post weekly farm-to-table recipes, homesteading ideas, and healthy living. Always feel free to share this recipe with someone you think would like it, and thank you for sharing in our homestead.